Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Roby. I work for Radiant Earth, and we wanted to get this group together to kind of, just better explain to the public what each of our conferences are and use this as a tool for people to refer to in the future. So this is being recorded and will be online for people to view in the future. We're going to go through about 5 minutes per conference, and the order that we're going to be going in is somewhat like sequential. And so Priscilla just hosted a conference about like a few weeks ago now. So Priscilla's going to kick us off, and then we'll pass it on to the upcoming conferences. So that order will be North 51, which is happening near the end of April, then to CNG Conference 2025, which is the end of April, beginning of May, EO Summit that's happening in June, and then Sat Camp, which is happening in September, and then finally SatSummit, which doesn't have a next date set, but usually happens every other year. It's a bit complicated
About
now.
an 18-month cadence usually.
Okay. Yeah. And there's another location and added this last year. So that will be shared at the end by Ian. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions from you all. You can put there's a Q&A section. So if you have questions throughout the event, you can put those in there. And if we don't get them to them during someone's talk, if it's not answered, there's space for that at the end. So with that, I'll pass it off to Priscilla to kick us off.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So I'm Priscilla Cole, the event chair for the Geospatial Risk Summit. And this event brings together the private sector risk professionals to think critically about climate and physical risks, which affect business operations, planning, and mitigation actions for the future. So at that event, insurance was the heaviest represented industry, but also there were folks from finance, supply chain, energy, transportation, and even healthcare. So climate and stress and natural disasters have caused a lot of losses to damage and business functioning in recent years. And we know that those things are only going to get worse as the future goes on and climate disruptions get worse and worse. So in addition to those folks out in industry, we also had in attendance companies providing data and analysis solutions from everything from Earth observation, ground sensors, various platforms, and solutions tapping into the network of human chatter and response that tends to happen around natural disasters. There's a lot that happens kind of out in the social media and various chats and so forth. And, there's some really creative solutions thinking about how to capture that information and combining it with things like satellite data. So yeah, this past January was the very first event. It was a 2-day event in New York City. Day one was a technical training workshops where we had folks from various companies that, a lot of solution providers and so forth. And they did some demos showing how you take big Earth observation data or, inputs around disasters and plugging those into workflows. Around risk analytics. So, applied to things like insurance, finance, emergency management. There was a nice spread to see how folks are thinking about things like floods and fire was a really big topic. Happening in LA recently. And then day two of the event brought together a lot of risk managers and business leaders from these various industries up on stage in a lot of panel discussions, talking about, like the impacts of these things and the losses that are happening and how they're, positioning themselves, kind of sharing ideas. This is really like an interdisciplinary, like break down the silos and kind of share from your perspectives, like what you're doing, what kind of data you're using. And also there were a lot of networking opportunities, so people could really get in there and meet folks from, and it was really interesting to see like, in the same conversation, like data providers and they were with insurance people and then, also finance and, all these just different cross-sectional things happening. So yeah, this last January was the very first time. It was successful by a lot of measures. There's been a lot of buzz since, and we are planning to bring it about every year. But details will soon to be announced. So stay tuned.
Awesome. And I just have a quick question. How many people were at the first event?
Yeah, so if you combine the 2 days of folks
Yeah,
that showed up, it was about 150
cool.
this time around. So yeah, a decent showing for the first time.
Yeah. And for next time, are you hoping to grow that? Do you, that size feel like the right size?
There's so many different considerations, especially,
Yeah.
as you talk about like what city to bring it to and so forth, things it's harder to find venues in New York City. So, all of that's kind of being discussed right now because yeah, definitely cheaper if you move to a different place.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think that's good for the public to kind of have an idea on too, and like be able to reach out if they are like, we really want to have it here. We're really interested. So, um, glad to have you a part of this and have more people being exposed to this conference. So thank you.
Yep.
So with that, I'll pass it off. So North 51 is next. John, are you speaking for this? Okay,
Yeah, you bet.
go ahead.
So yeah, thank you, Michelle, and Priscilla. Congratulations on a successful event. The first one is always the hardest to pull off, so congratulations. It's great to see the success there. North 51 is held every year in the Canadian Rockies, and our company Gnosis, along with Will's company Spark Geo, puts it on. We've collaborated to build an event that is big ideas focused. We like to talk about technology and where technology is going over the next kind of 3 to 5 year time frame. And it's all focused around innovations, breakthroughs, the technological advances that we're seeing. But we like to tie that back into the so what. What does that mean for the world around us? What does that mean for our businesses? What does that mean for the people building and using the technology? And what can we sort of look forward to in the future? We created it because we got tired of going to events where you just got pitched all the time. You walk around to a booth and a salesperson goes, "Hey, buy my thing, buy my thing, buy my thing," but you never get to have a really good experience around, what idea are you working on? What technology is going to make a big difference out there, and how do you see that affecting things? So this year's event is the 7th annual event that we've run. It's always hosted in the Canadian Rockies. So this year it's in Canmore, just outside of Banff, April 23rd to 25th. And for any Americans who are watching, with the Canadian exchange rate right now, everything's basically 30% off up here. So really no excuse to not come. It's just a fantastic extra reason to come. The event is built as a series of panels, presentations with a number of keynotes anchoring it. We like to get as many voices as possible up on stage and represent a wide variety of viewpoints. We've also built in a ton of time for networking because the people who come to this event have very good questions. They want to engage with everybody else, and they want to find time to meet and talk to everyone. So we've built in social events. We built in lots of time between the sessions, and make sure everyone has a chance to get together. We have about 100 to 125 people attending. So it's big enough that you can meet everybody, but it's not so big that you can hide in the back and work on your laptop the whole time. It's fantastic for engagement and really deep conversation. So if you're looking for an event like that, I strongly recommend you check out North 51 and join us this spring.
And did you say the exact dates already?
Yeah, April 23rd to 25th in Canmore, Alberta, just outside of Banff.
Cool. And it's always been at that same location, right?
It's moved to a few different venues, but it's always been in Banff for Canmore. I find there's power in getting people outside of the city and getting people outside of their kind of everyday work and life. They focus better and engage better, and people have a stronger experience. So very much a fan of it. Plus, the mountains are amazing, and you should come see them.
Amazing. Well, I feel like that's a great lead off to CNG Conference 2025. So with that, I'll pass it off to Jed.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. I highly endorse North 51 and the Canadian Rockies. It's and yeah, I mean, now I'm in this position where I'm like, we're kind of copying them a little bit. I call the North 51 CNG combo the Rocky Mountain series for the geospatial community. And but I think we're very complementary. So we'll be doing the Cloud Native Geo Forum conference April 30th to May 2nd in Utah. also in the Rockies, at Snowbird, which is it's a ski resort some people have heard of, but it's really nice. The fact that we're doing it at the end of April means we're able to get really great rates on an otherwise quite expensive hotel. That's really nice to stay in, and it's just a beautiful spot. But we decided that there was room for yet another conference in our community, uh, for the practitioners, the people who it's really their job to touch data and to fight with data all day, um, to come together and talk to one another about what works and what doesn't work. And I think there's a common thread here among all of us, um, in that we do need vendor neutral spaces for our community to have these conversations and not necessarily be pitched all the time, or have the conference be convened by a single technology provider that has a very clear agenda. The truth is that our community is pretty vast, and we have a lot of very smart, generous people that are, they come from a lot of different parts of the economy, including academia, government, startups, enterprises that are all hacking on these things together. And so we see the need to bring them together, create a space for them to meet and talk about what they're working on, and accelerate the development of new tools and file formats and things like that. So I would say it's quite tech heavy, quite practitioner heavy, conference that we're trying to go for. That said, there's another sort of policy component that is also emerging as we've been working with the Cloud Native Geo Forum's editorial board. I don't know if you've read the news this year, but there's a lot going on in the U.S. federal government that's forcing us to contemplate a future in which we have a lot less research funding coming from the federal government, and potentially less data being provided by the federal government. Without getting like too hysterical about what's going on there, I think it is high time that we start figuring out as a community, how do we create resilient data infrastructure? And so that's going to be another huge theme of the conference, is bringing people together to figure that out as well. And this is where I realized I probably should have led with the tagline for Cloud Native Geo, which is it's where geospatial data users create the future together. And so that's really what we're trying to do, bring people together to figure out what does the future hold for how we work with data, very practically and tactically, but also what is the future that we need to create so that we have reliable access to trustworthy data, either for our own missions or for the customers that we're serving. So I'll leave it at that. April 30th to May 2nd in Utah. I encourage people to go both to North 51 and to CNG, so you can compare and contrast the mountains. And I leave it to you to decide which is better, Canada or the US.
That'll be our final poll at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jed.
Yeah.
And with that, I'll pass it off to Aravind, who will talk about EOSummit.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. It's good to be here with the community of people trying to put together events with kind of the same goal, I suppose. Cool. So about EOSummit. So EOSummit is Earth Observation Summit, because he has been on the news a lot recently. So just clarifying, EO here is Earth Observation. So Earth Observation Summit, the goal of the conference is really to bring the end users of Earth observation and the Earth observation community together. So it's really just the entire ecosystem of folks in Earth observation. The motivation for the conference really came about when a few end users in insurance, in agriculture and mining, not really remote sensing people, not techies, but they wanted to understand what remote sensing and Earth observation meant for their businesses, because they were continuously pitched by a bunch of satellite companies. They wanted to understand what other companies are doing. Is there a place where they can go and see how other companies are using, what are the technologies that are available, what other companies are there, so that they can get an objective view of things. And that was the motivation for the conference. So TerraWatch is not really an events company, but we decided to kind of take the plunge. Really did a exhaustive research of all the events that happen in geospatial and Earth observation, and published the list actually for the community over the last couple of years. The motivation for that too was really to find out, is there an event that I can recommend to them where things are available in an accessible format for them, where it doesn't get very technical, but also it focuses on what it means for them through case studies. And that was kind of really the point of Geosummit. So Geosummit this year is happening in June. We did the first edition last year in London, very hesitantly, but somehow it worked out. I think it was pretty successful. The goal was not to lose the money that was invested. That happened, thankfully. So people found it interesting. The point was also to see if bringing people from different industries who really have, nothing to speak to each other apart from their interest in Earth observation, if that was the only common theme between someone working in insurance versus agriculture versus energy and climate. Of course they can speak about other things, but then in a conference, the common theme was Earth observation. So I was quite apprehensive about that, but kind of worked out last year. So yeah, last year happened in London. It was about 350 people. This year is coming to New York. The level of adoption of Earth observation by the private sector is higher. So, and one thing also I forgot to mention, so there's no mention or focus on defense. There's already, enough events that focus on Earth observation for defense. So here we focus on more civilian use cases and commercial use cases. So that's really a quick idea of Geosummit. The event happens in 4 tracks. So there are 2 tracks that run parallelly on the 2 days. So there's insurance and finance in one track, agriculture and forestry, energy and utilities, and then environment and climate. So 4 tracks, essentially that's categorized so that people coming from those sectors can attend those tracks. And even in those tracks, what we try and focus on is really 2 things. One is case studies. So if you're a satellite company, you're coming and presenting, who are sponsors, they present case studies of how their technology is being used in the specific industry. And then we have presentations from the end users themselves who present about how they're using Earth observation within their organization, what is their significance for EO for them, and whether they see any challenges as well, because this is the community to kind of complain to put it simply. So that's kind of what they try and do. And then we have panel discussions. This year we also try to make the panel discussions more dynamic. Instead of having the same people, same profile, we try to also make the panel discussions more multidisciplinary, where we have end users and solution providers and government representatives and satellite data companies all sit together in the same panel and chat about specific applications, whether it's wildfire or climate risk or emissions, focusing on a bunch of topics. So really that's the idea of Geosummit. And it's getting a little bigger this year, so hopefully there's going to be more traction. So if you're anyone who's interested in understanding what the Earth observation industry has to offer, but then more importantly, what the end users are doing with Earth observation and meet end users, then Geosummit is kind of the event to go to.
Amazing. Thank you. So I speak next. I'm representing SatCamp today. But Radiant Earth, where I work, is not the organization that puts it on. It's actually a coalition of many organizations, all volunteer-based, for the committee, like the leadership committee for SatCamp. So SatCamp this year in September will be the 3rd SatCamp. The first one was in fall 2023. It's been held in Boulder, Colorado each time, and it will also be in Boulder, Colorado this fall. The spark for SatCamp, I have this idea in my head, and I don't know if someone told me it or Ian, correct me if this is incorrect, but my understanding of how SatCamp was born was people attending a conference. It may have been SatSummit, may have been a different one, and finding themselves in that hallway track, like we like to call it, where there's talks going on, but just talking in the hallway and networking is that primary spot where people find themselves and find the most enriching part of a conference is like going and networking with different people. And people thought, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had a conference that was mostly a hallway track kind of vibe? And wouldn't it be great if we were not in a stuffy conference room, but we're actually out in nature having these sorts of discussions, but on a trail or together, like on a bike ride or something like this. And then SatCamp, the idea of SatCamp was born from that. Again, don't know if that's an old wives' tale. Ian's nodding his head, so I'm assuming that's about accurate. But and that's basically how what it ends up being. So SatCamp has a combination of space for outdoor events, so people doing different sports outside together or activities outside together, and then partial more conference, more structured style. So lightning talks, panel talks, and these sorts of things, and then also space for more discussion-based things. And so we've had 2 of them so far, and as from the first one to the second one, I saw a lot of growth between the 2 of figuring it out, seeing what works and what doesn't, what was missing, really trying to emphasize that camp feeling of like, how do we make this feel like a special, unique experience that this group is experiencing together and can create these deeper bonds like you do at camp, and you have these like more deeper discussions. It's a smaller group. Each time it's been 75 people, and that's capped because of the venue. It's at Chautauqua and Boulder. But that kind of is the perfect size for this sort of event because it keeps it more intimate and more manageable with going out and doing hikes and runs and bikes, climbing and going to the cafe, whatever. So that's been the right size for this. But yeah, each year I've seen it grow, and I'm on the planning committee. And so for the upcoming year, we're continuing to innovate and figure out, okay, what works well, what are we keeping? And then also, like what is missing? What do we want to improve upon? And new volunteers have come in each year to kind of spice up planning and kind of get new perspectives in. I don't think our theme is official yet, but I'll just kind of generally refer to this next year. We're trying to have more focus on a specific theme. In the past, we've been more general of like, hey, just come share lightning talks or having just different like interesting panels. But this year we're really trying to focus on a specific theme. And I think it'll be somewhere around the concept of geospatial community resilience. And so kind of going off of what Jed and other speakers have said around the importance of our communities working together and helping each other, and how do we continue to support and build up our vast network in geospatial to improve the work that we do. You know, we're not competitors, just as we're talking about or having this webinar all together, we're trying to work with each other and build each other up and not compete against each other. And that goes along with the theme at SatCamp generally, but then specifically for this year as well, of how do we help each other do our work better? And so, yes, SatCamp this year, the dates, I think September 24th to the 26th, I want to say. At Chautauqua again, we've also found that importance of going out into nature and also having the same location has been really helpful, and with that consistency with both planning and then also just kind of, like going off to camp kind of energy. So I think I hit everything I wanted to say about SatCamp. Happy to answer questions later. And with that, I will pass it off to Ian to talk about our final conference, which is SatSummit.
Awesome. Yeah, and before even getting into SatSummit, I just want to take a moment to shout out everyone else who's on the screen. Creating an event like this is an act of love for the community. It is extremely hard, soul tormenting work. It's just like a lot to pull off. And these events, because we're deliberately creating events that are not sales conferences where you're being pitched all the time, they many of them like SatCamp, like we lose money. Like some of them, many lose money, or they just barely break even, or they might make a little bit of money, but nothing that pales in comparison to the amount of effort that goes into pulling this off. And so this is just like, I have a ton of respect for everybody else who's on this, having gone through putting on events and knowing what's involved, and a ton of respect for what the contributions are to the community, because it's so important to have things like this. So SatSummit, so again, I'm Ian Schuler, I'm a development seed and one of the founders of SatSummit. SatSummit is an event that DevSeed pulls off. In the last several we've done in combination with a group called Dev Global, who are amazing and really good at pulling off events, whereas we, this is not our day job as well. But SatSummit kind of emerged about a decade ago when we were doing work with the World Bank on the use of satellite imagery and EO data in global development. And so we talked to a bunch of people in the development community, and we talked to a bunch of people in the Earth observation community, and we realized that these people were not talking to each other at all. As much as they liked to think about how they were using these space companies were talking about the impact they were having on the planet, and all, these development organizations were talking about how tech forward they were. They were not speaking the same language. There was like this huge gap. And so SatSummit was at first just getting these people all in the same room, but really like in the purpose of accelerating the application of Earth data, Earth observation data, to the most important problems facing the planet. And that really, the nub of that early on was very much with the global development community, but that's kind of expanded over time to people who, in agriculture who are feeding the planet, or people who are working in infrastructure and other areas as well. So it's a kind of multifaceted event. So a few things on that. One is we try to have a pretty good mix of practitioners in the humanitarian community or development community or these other areas, a set of people who are more on the enabling environment, like like policymakers, funders, other people who have the ability to write checks or make some of these things happen, and then the like new space and technologists who are building some of the tools and implementation and bringing those various perspectives to a lot of these issues. The way we organize it, it's usually a 2-day conference. It's a plenary that's fairly opinionated, that is like going through what we believe are the most important issues and questions to drive this community forward and a set of issues forward. And that we collect over 6 months in advance, just talking to everybody that we know and trying to understand what their problems are, what they think is important, what does this community need to be talking about. And then a set of like breakout sessions that tend to be try to be deliberately action and outcome oriented, to get the right people together in a room to advance some specific problem or agenda or opportunity to better make data available to first responders on the front lines, or better improve our coordination around data standards for certain things. So it's very outcome driven. Because it's been around for a while before some of these other things existed, it kind of overlaps a bit. Like there's a big focus on data accessibility, and so there have over the years been people who are focused on cloud native geospatial and some of the things that will go on in that event. But I would say if that is an area that you care about and you can only go to one event, don't come to SatSummit, go to the Cloud Native Geospatial event, because you're going to find a much richer set of conversation and thoughtfulness around that specific set of issues. If you're working in a vertical like ag, where we have some degree of coverage, but that's really what you're focused on, and you can only go to one event, don't come to SatSummit, go to EO Summit. You're going to find a much richer conversation and further depth, particularly on the further down the line of end users. So I would, I think there are other events that have emerged that I think could do capture some of these different areas better. I think that's basically all I wanted to say, and happy to hear any questions come up.
Perfect. And now we will get into the questions. So I'm just going to work my way through what's in this Q&A block at the bottom of your page. There's Q&A section. So putting them there instead of the chat is very helpful. So thank you for that. The first one that we have on here is, how would you all compare FOSS4G, so free and open source software for geospatial conferences, both the international and the North American conferences, to the conferences we discussed today? Does anyone feel inspired to take that question on first?
I can jump into that.
Yeah.
I think like the great power of the FOSS4G conferences is the community element and the ability for anyone to apply to talk, and the fact that you get an astonishingly interesting diversity of thought, from someone who's mapping their backyard to someone who's mapping some of the biggest problems in geospatial and indeed the world. So I think some of the events you're seeing around this table maybe have a more sort of curated feel to the story of each event. So less community driven, more sort of focused on particular market verticals or particular sectors or particular practices. So I think for this community, definitely consider consider that each organizing committee is thinking pretty hard about how the story of each event is being presented. Whereas in the FOSS4G community, it's very much more about what the community wants to see. So you'll see community voting, and you'll see the ability for anyone to be up on stage, which is tremendously powerful in and of itself, but a slightly different feel.
Cool. Thank you, Will. Does anyone else have anything they want to add on to that?
I'll just add on a quick one too to say,
Yeah.
the FOSS4G events tend to skew fairly technical and fairly user oriented. And I would say many of the events we're putting on or recommending here are, at a strategic level or a bit of a higher level than that, just sort of conceptually, with the possible exception of the cloud native one, which I'll let Jed talk about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll chime in here, and then because there's another question asking about the other like FOSS4G State of the Map, Fed Geo Day. Like there's, there are many more indie conferences that aren't represented here. And my response to that, at least from our perspective, is that in one way we're much broader, in that, we're not only about free and open source software. There are proprietary platforms and products that are huge contributors to the cloud native geospatial ecosystem, and we're happy to have them join. So there's nothing that necessarily explicitly about a focus on open source, although we have a very strong bias towards open standards and things like that. State of the Map, that's for the OpenStreetMap community, and it's a very particular community that has particular needs, and so we love them and welcome. We'll have people from, I believe, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap at our event. And then obviously Fed Geo Day is about mostly focused on the US federal government. We believe quite strongly that there's a need to bring in a diverse set of organizations and types of organizations into these conferences, and at least into our community. We think great things happen when you have people who have different budgets and different priorities, different constraints, all coming together and talking to each other about the same data types. So all this to say is, I think it's a great thing that our community is so large and robust now that there's room for lots of different conferences for different communities. And to echo Ian, that there are people foolish enough and who love the community enough to keep trying to create more conferences. There's lots of room for all of them.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm gonna mark that one as answered. One question that maybe Ian could answer, and it was after that we talked. So someone just wanting a cleaner way to differentiate between all of the conferences that have the word SAT in them.
Sure.
So SatCamp, SatSummit, the small SAT conference in Utah, other big satellite conferences.
Yeah, the only way we could make it more confusing is if we use the word crypto or AI in the conference name some way or another. Yeah, no, it's so SatSummit was really focused on the application of the data downstream, I think, a bit more. And then SatCamp, as you mentioned, Michelle, is almost like a spin-off of SatCamp. It captured some of that same vibe and some of the same sort of overall topics and themes, but with a much deeper conversation in a different sort of setting and different sort of format. And then I haven't been to a small sat conference in Utah, but my understanding is it's much more of an industry event that is more focused on satellite providers and the technology around it that like the small sat providers need. It is kind of more of that other type of conference that we were talking about, the big industry conferences. I haven't attended myself, so maybe somebody who's been to that can speak a little bit more.
I went to small sat, I think, years ago in California, though, if I remember. I think it's the same conference, but yeah, it was more people who were building and launching satellites rather than the application of satellite data.
Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about SatSummit as well, like Michelle, as you said, we don't have a date yet. We're still kind of figuring it out. It's about on a 18-month cadence, and so we would normally do it in the fall. We're looking at maybe November timing wise, but we're also sort of figuring out a few things, particularly given the extinction level event that's hitting the global development community right now. It'll be really interesting to see how all of that plays out, and it could be a very interesting SatSummit indeed. And I think we'll have a lot more visibility into what's appropriate, or what's the size, what's the themes, what's the what is useful a few more weeks down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just reminded me something that I was thinking of that I wanted to share just around these conferences is the way that they're spaced out right now. We have two that are in like about 2 months. And then so that's North 51 and CNG Conference 2025. And then in June, we have EO Summit. So a couple months after that. And then a couple months after that, in September, we have Sat Camp. And then potentially a couple months after that, we have SatSummit. And then a couple months after that, hopefully the Risk Summit again. And so I like this. For me, it seems very cool that these are spaced out, and there's like, not saying that everyone has to go to every conference and work isn't just going to conferences, but there's also a really cool piece of this of how we have so much to discuss and things to work on together in person, and going to these conferences and having that in-person time, especially in a state of the world where a lot of us work remotely or at home, and getting that space together with each other and kind of building on the conversations that we're having, and kind of checking in as the state of the world shifts, as the work we're doing and the need is shifting. I think it's really cool that we have spaces where we are able to gather and able to, yeah, like adapt to, okay, we talked about this in April. Now we're at Sat Camp. Like, what are our thoughts now? What has changed? And so now more than ever, I feel like it's a really important time to gather and be able to be in person together. So just a thought that came off of that from when he was speaking. Cool. There is a question in the chat that I don't quite understand. I'll read it. Maybe someone else better understands. The question is, how is the reception to each conference and event towards press and media? Does someone understand that better than I do?
Sorry. I'd love to take that one, possible, because that was actually a surprising outcome of the event that I just ran, because of its focus on, climate and physical risk, and then some of these industries like insurance and finance. It was interesting to me how, like, I reached out to some groups, but a lot of groups that I'd never even heard of reached out to me with interest, because there's a lot of groups, focused around climate change and technology, and, like in the news a lot this past year, especially has been, a lot of things around hurricanes and fires, and, and this is very top of mind for people, and like this insurance affordability crisis. And there's also quite mature news outlets like around insurance and finance, both have like, very dedicated news outlets. So it was really interesting how many different member groups, some different media groups, universities, even some of these groups that meet a monthly happy hour to talk about how worried everybody is about climate. The event that I put on actually drew a lot of attention in those different groups. And, if you go to the website and see like some of the sponsors, supporters, and like the who attends, like you can kind of see who some of those groups are. Yeah, but it definitely felt like we hit a nerve, something that's like very timely and, like in people's minds, like sort of this practical application of what climate risk looks like, in some of the dollars and cents of day to day, like being a homeowner, having insurance, or, like what's happening, money bleeding out through various channels. So yeah, that was kind of, and maybe that's because the conference was so focused in these areas that you got that. But yeah, really exciting to see.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we engage the media. We have I find members of the media are really good moderators, and so we often have members of the media who are participating or who come on their own. And also, we will have certain panels and sessions that we designate as either Chatham House or off the record, depending on what the topic's about and the preferences of the panelists. In some cases, we have an NDC so we can get representation from organizations and people in government who may not have authority to talk on behalf of their agency. And so we found every time members of the press are understand how to deal with that and are very respectful of that and are happy to work with it. You just need to be clear at the onset. And so, we were able to, that's in terms of how we manage the press, that's how we've approached it before. And it's been worked very well.
Yeah, one thing I'll add is at Summit in London, we managed to attract, one insurance-focused kind of media organization that came in because they were just curious about what satellites have to do with insurance, and they saw a couple of case studies from a company called Floodbase and another one that I forget. And those companies got some stories out of that. It was good for them. But essentially, I see, at least EO Summit as an event that is open for those folks. I mean, our industry kind of lives in a bubble where we're very happy with the applications and the impact that we create, but the outside world is not. And I think we are also at a point where I think we need to talk more about the impact of our technology, especially the public investments. So I hope I've already reached out to folks. So at least for this year's EO Summit, there'll be someone from New York Times and Wall Street Journal and a couple of others who have reached out to come and attend to basically cover this subject because it just usually doesn't get covered about how people don't even know that a large insurer is using Landsat or a large energy firm is dependent on Modi's data or a hedge fund. So I think that gets a lot of attention. So I hope that, EO Summit kind of becomes an event and we are able to put an event together that is accessible enough for anyone in media to come and attend. So yeah, definitely open for that. We already had something come out of last year's event, so hoping to get more out of this year's event. But yeah, we really need to kind of, get the word across.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting this is maybe a point of differentiation between some of the events around this table. Ian mentioned it earlier. Up in North 51, we think very much about being sort of Chatham House rules, to allow for those kind of discrete conversations between organizations, which kind of break down some barriers. So maybe a little bit less press and media and a little bit more discrete discussion, asking why something is happening to a particular organization, asking about sort of historical things, and then providing that discussion space to create collisions, to create those new and innovative ideas. So I think it's great that we have events that are focused on pushing out the messaging, and I think it's great that we have events that are focused on creating those kind of in inter-industry collisions. So it's a great question to ask us all. So it helps us find that point of differentiation.
And now at this point, every conference has kind of stated something other than Jed. Do you want to talk about CNG's stance on it?
It's really funny. I mean, I would love to have media there. I haven't thought about this, and maybe we should. I mean, it's I think there's some. I'm sure there are reporters that would love like a reason to go to Utah, hang out at Snowbird. So yeah, we need to think about this. But I also think that a lot of what we're doing is kind of esoteric, and so might not be that interesting to most media. That said, because we are really pushing hard on the resilient data infrastructure part of this, and I can't name any names yet, but we've invited some kind of heavy hitters from the White House, previous White House administrations and other people, there might be some kind of draw there. And then we have to balance between, do we want to have very candid conversations that we don't really necessarily want to be reported on, or do we have a message that we want to get out to the world through the media? So I don't know yet. It's a long way of saying I haven't decided yet.
Cool. To be shared soon. And
Yeah.
for Sat Camp, we definitely more on Chatham House rules. And yeah, a lot heavier, similar to North 51, maybe a bit more extreme of just like, yeah. So maybe media, that's not the place if you're a media person trying to cover something. Sat Camp probably is not the event for you. So that was those questions. Let's see. There's some, I'm trying to sort through these. Some of these are more like comments or clarification. Someone gave some good clarification on a few of the questions that have been answered already. One thing that I'll address, and if anyone else is seeing the Q&A and want to pick out anything from these more like comments, someone was kind of clarifying around that question around the comparing to other conferences, and something that kind of jumped out at me is the comment around like price point and location is something that can alienate someone from going to a conference. And I've experienced that myself, especially with the international Phosphor-Gs. They change location every year and all over the globe, and often to a unique spot that's not a common hub for conferences, which is something I love about Phosphor-G International. And it's also something that makes it really hard to get to. And I think there's beauty in both. And I think it's kind of adds to that push, or that like the pitch for different conferences that do have some overlap, but happening in different places in the world. It alienates certain people from being able to go. If you can't go to Kosovo for a conference for work, if you live in the US, but it also expands it up to a group of people that would never have been able to come to one in New York, let's say. So yeah, I think there's beauty in us having these events kind of scattered all over. And yeah, we have these ones that are in the Rockies that are a bit harder to get to, but do add that special piece to it that makes it a special event, but then also ones that are in bigger cities that can perhaps be more accessible to general public too. So I think that is only adds to the work that we're doing here of having these things that are somewhat related. And if you can't make every single one, that's reasonable and like fine. But then also having a space that different people can tap into depending on their location and their budget and time of year. So yeah, just a pitch for like, we don't want to have conferences all year, all the time, but there is benefit to having them kind of scattered throughout the year and throughout the globe. With that, we're ending our time here. If people have more questions, feel free to reach out to folks on social media or in other ways. And again, we are going to share this recording online. We're going to send out an email to all of you with the links and information on each of these conferences. I'll give one quick moment if anyone has anything to say. I see Ian's typing in response, so if you just want to speak it as well, this is a good time to do so.
I was just there was a question about attending Geospatial conferences versus other, and I think that's a really insightful question. I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I think everyone's mileage varies a little bit, but I think now, even more than you might have in the past, is a time to explore domains that are close to geo and tech areas that don't have geo in the title. I think we're seeing even more overlap than and will in the future. So yeah, if you are in the geo world, I would encourage you to look outside of geo conferences as well. And I think increasingly we'll see those other communities become part of things like Cloud Native Geospatial and North 51 and others as well. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Any last comments? Okay, great.
I would say there is an opportunity for a Tour de Geo t-shirt here.
Oh yes.
So watch this space.
Yeah.
The band tour shirt, like whoever, if you go to all of them, then you get the shirt for free. Kind of thing.
You got it.
We can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Amazing.
support that.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for taking the time and explaining to our community more about each of these events. All of them are very cool, and going to any of them is going to benefit the attendees in some way. So, and having different attendees come to different conferences really helps make the conference as well. Like diverse perspectives are vital to the success of these events. So we encourage whoever can go to ones that excite them to come. And yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the webinar here in a moment, but have a lovely rest of your day, and we appreciate your time and brains.